They found her in the mud behind a burned-out church on the edge of Boone County, her fingers raw, clothes torn where the fire hadn't singed them clean off. The preacher's widow said she looked like an animal that crawled through the coals just to die under God's eye, but the marshal who hauled her up by the elbow only said, "Another orphan. They'll keep coming." He didn't mean to keep her. August Rigg had buried 6 men by then, 3 by order, 2 by rage, and 1 because he wouldn't stop begging. The war had been 10 years past, but still rode his shoulders like it never ended. He didn't talk about it, didn't write either. He hauled freight between counties, ran cattle for men who paid in silence and dry whiskey, and kept his own stretch of land fenced with barbed wire and dogs that knew not to bark unless death was near. The girl didn't even tell him her name, just followed when he mounted up to leave, her hands bandaged in rags she must have stripped off a corpse. He told her to stay. She didn't. He told her to leave again 2 towns later. She didn't. By the time they reached his land, he'd stopped speaking altogether. Some called him a good man for letting her stay. Others said he took her in because of what he owed. The truth was more bleak. She reminded him of someone he'd failed to bury deep enough. So he called her a favor. No more than that. She slept in the barn with the dogs, cooked once she learned how to keep meat from turning, and patched his shirts with slow, uncertain stitches. When asked her name, she just looked sideways and shrugged. August didn't push. He didn't want her past, didn't want to give her his either. They shared a silence that widened into understanding. Seasons passed like gunshots, sudden, sharp, and followed by blood. The land was cruel, but she learned to move within it like something born from stone and fire. Wolves took the lambs one winter. She killed 2 with a hatchet and dragged their bodies back without a word. When a thief came in spring, thinking the girl might be an easier prize than the stock, August buried him under the north fence and taught her how to load a scattergun. "You shoot first," he said. "Don't wait to blade." She nodded once and never asked questions. Her eyes didn't blink much anymore. It was near the 3rd summer when the old woman came down the ridge, leaning on a hickory cane carved with teeth. She traded charms for salt and asked to see the girl. Said she'd dreamed of fire and faces half burnt. When August refused, she spat in the dirt and said, "You've made a ghost your ward, Rigg. That's never been done kindly." The girl stood behind the porch post, shadowed and still. August didn't look back. "She's not mine," he said. "No," the woman answered, "but you're hers." That night the girl took the saddle blanket and lay beneath the stars. August watched her from the porch with a bottle resting on his thigh. He didn't ask why, he knew. Sometimes the walls whispered too loud. What changed things was the letter. A rider came from down Gallows Creek Way, bringing it folded and marked with a seal August hadn't seen since the war. It bore no return, but August's face went pale just reading the outside. He burned the paper before she could ask. She watched the flame eat it and said nothing, but something in the air shifted. He started locking the rifle cabinet, stopped drinking at night, checked the horizon before he'd ride. By fall, he'd taught her to kill clean, jugular, not gut, shoot through the eye, not the jaw, bury bones deep, not shallow where the rains could expose them. She never asked why, she only listened. He gave her a name then, said it like a curse. "Call yourself Ruth," he told her. "It's strong and it ends things." She wore it like a brand. People who passed through started asking about her. A girl with scars on her palms and a stare that could stop a coyote. Was she his daughter, a hired hand, a runaway? August never answered. Ruth didn't care. She was learning what mattered and what didn't. Most people didn't. Then came the night he didn't come home. She found the horse 2 miles out, its flanks torn, reins snapped, blood still wet beneath its saddle. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just took the rifle and the dogs and followed the trail west through the canyon, where even the hawks wouldn't fly after dark. 3 days later, she returned with blood up to her elbows and the heel of her left boot split in half. August followed her in, limping and half dead, his coat tied around his ribs. Neither said a word. She dragged him inside, sewed the wound herself, and fed him broth until the fever broke. "You weren't supposed to come," he rasped, barely awake. She looked down at the scar running across his chest, jagged like a lightning strike. "You called me a favor," she said, "but I'm the only thing keeping you alive now." He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. By winter, word spread. August Rigg had taken in a girl, and the girl had teeth. The men he'd once known began sniffing at his trail again, not for cattle, not for coin, for reckoning. The kind that starts in old orders and ends in dirt graves. August knew the price was coming due. What he didn't expect was who'd stand beside him when the sky turned red again. Ruth did not flinch when the riders came. She met them on the ridge with her coat undone and her rifle aimed steady. Her face was as cold as the wind that peeled bark off the trees. "Leave or die," she said. One laughed. He was the first to fall. And when the others rode in, it was no longer August they feared. It was the girl he'd called a favor. They buried 3 men before dawn. August stood silent as Ruth dragged the bodies, one shoulder dislocated from the force of a fall, his hands too stiff to help. The dogs circled and growled low, uneasy from the stench of powder and death. Ruth worked until her palms bled again, though the skin had long since turned to something less human. She said nothing, not about the dead, not about the pain, not about what came next. August knew she wouldn't. What no one had counted on was how quiet she'd become after the killing, not withdrawn, just listening. As if she expected more hooves, more guns, more ghosts, she hardly slept. The fire in the hearth grew smaller each night, as if warmth itself had become a luxury they couldn't afford. August once thought vengeance had an end. Ruth was teaching him otherwise. The men who'd come were part of a name he hadn't heard in 9 years, Harrow Beck. Once, Harrow had been a captain under the flag, same as August. After the war, he turned to his own cause, collecting debts, claiming blood for grievances no court would ever name. August had defected, refused to carry out a certain order. Harrow called it betrayal, said justice meant nothing if it wasn't absolute. Now his men were hunting again. "You should leave," August told her. "They're not after you." Ruth poured water into the kettle, not looking up. "You were the only man who didn't touch me when I was too broken to stop him. That's not a reason to die." She finally looked at him. "It's the only one that matters." There was no argument after that. They moved the livestock farther north into the pines, past where the creek narrowed into a cleft of rock called Widow's Cradle, set traps for any scouts, reinforced the cabin walls with iron nails and ash planks soaked in resin. August watched her work like someone born to survive a siege. She wasn't afraid. She was patient, precise. "I didn't raise you for this," he muttered once, mostly to himself. Ruth had paused then, knife in hand, a strip of rabbit hide half-shaved. "You didn't raise me at all. You just gave me a place to finish becoming." Word reached them in signs, a mutilated fox strung upside down from their boundary post, a set of footprints around the well that didn't belong to either of them. The sound of a distant shot, hours before dawn, too deliberate to be hunting. Ruth started sleeping with a pistol under her pillow. Then came Jonah Beck. He rode in during the rain, alone, his face hidden beneath a wide hat and oilskin coat. He claimed to want peace, said he was tired of war, of Harrow's blood pacts, of burning what was already ash. Ruth didn't believe him. But August did, until he didn't. Jonah stayed 3 nights, spoke of old regrets by the fire, told August he still had a way out. Ruth listened from the loft above, rifle always near. On the 4th night, she slit Jonah's saddle and found the second pistol sewn under the lining, the kind used for quick kills in close quarters. She showed it to August in silence. He nodded, jaw clenched. The next morning, Jonah was gone. They found the rope he'd used swinging from a cypress tree a mile east, broken by the weight of a body too heavy with guilt or too clever to hang at all. The storm rolled in a day later. Wind tore the shutters, rain beat the roof like it wanted inside. August stood at the window, rifle in hand, watching the trail disappear into fog. Ruth sat by the fire, a knife turning slowly in her hand. The dogs had gone quiet, not asleep, just waiting. "They'll come tonight," she said. August didn't ask how she knew. She was always right when it came to danger. At dusk, the bells strung across the fence rang once, then nothing. No war cries, no thunder of hooves. Just the steady, measured approach of men who didn't need noise to kill. August kissed the butt of his rifle like a relic and took his place behind the woodpile out front. Ruth vanished into the trees like smoke. She dug tunnels between the root beds 2 winters ago, just in case. He hadn't asked why, now he knew. The first shot wasn't his. It came from the dark beyond the barn, dropped a man who'd been circling wide. Another scream echoed through the pines, another shot, then nothing. August didn't move. He waited, listened. Then a voice cut through the storm, cold, amused. You always did let others die for your sins, Rig. Harrow Beck stepped into the clearing, flanked by 5 men in oilskin coats. One held a torch, another held a shovel. The implication was clear. Should have burned that church with the rest, Harrow said. August raised his rifle, didn't know she was in it. No, Harrow sneered, but you let her live, and that's worse. He stepped forward, gun drawn. Then Ruth rose behind him. She crawled from the root cellar like something buried alive. She shot the man with the torch first, the light extinguished in a scream, then another. Then she dropped to a crouch as the rest returned fire. It lasted less than a minute. When it was over, Harrow Beck was on his knees, blood seeping through his shirt. His gun was gone. Ruth stood behind him, calm, her pistol still warm. Do it, girl, Harrow spat. You think this ends anything? She walked around to face him, looked down at him like he was already gone. It ends you. She shot him once in the eye. Then again. Then again. August didn't stop her, not this time. When the smoke cleared and the storm passed, the world felt empty. But not silent. Ruth sat on the porch, staring at the edge of the woods. August sat beside her, his side stitched, one hand resting on his knee. You were never a favor, he said. She turned toward him. No, she said, I was the cost. By the spring thaw, their land stank of blood. They burned the bodies out in the canyon, where the smoke could rise without drawing eyes. Ruth stood at the edge of the fire until her boots steamed and the leather cracked. August watched from a hill above, not for reverence, not for peace, just to be sure nothing stood back up. Word of Harrow Beck's death didn't spread quickly. Men like him had too many lies built around them, too many hands dipped in the same darkness. Some denied it outright. Others whispered that August Rigg had finally gone feral, turned his girl loose like a trained wolf. A few rode out to find the truth. None returned. They could have left, the blood, the names, the weight of it all. But they didn't. Instead, they made the house stronger, rebuilt the porch with wider sightlines. Ruth tore down the barn's southern wall and raised a smokehouse. She moved like someone who expected war even in times of quiet. August didn't stop her. He'd begun to understand there was no peace for people like them, only pauses between attacks. That summer, a wagon came with 2 men and a boy. They weren't part of Harrow's old crew. They were settlers heading west, their youngest coughing blood in the back, his chest too hollow for hope. Ruth brought them water, helped feed the child from her own stores, and when he died that night, she built the pyre herself. The father asked how long she'd lived out here. Long enough, she said. You got a name. Ruth. He looked at her a while, like the word meant something different now. August didn't speak to the travelers, but after they left, he handed Ruth a worn map marked with old trails and blooded circles. That was the last of Beck's branch, he said, but not the root. Ruth took the map and stared at it like scripture. There was a name scrawled near the base, Cal Bannock. August saw her jaw tense. You knew him. He's the one who gave the order, she said, the night the church burned. August nodded once, a slow breath dragging past his teeth. You want him. She didn't blink. I want what he buried. The next morning, they rode out. No fanfare, no goodbyes. Ruth packed light 2 rifles, dried meat, bandages, and the pistol she'd used on Harrow. August rode with a limp now, but he didn't complain. Pain had become background noise. What mattered was what lay ahead. Their path took them through places forgotten even by time. Towns collapsed under dust. Stations stripped to timber bones. They slept under trees and in caves, Ruth always waking first. Twice they were followed, once by bounty men, once by something worse. The bounty men died quickly. The worst thing took longer. It came in the form of a man with kind eyes and too many questions. Called himself priest. Said he'd been tracking Cal Bannock for years. wore a cross carved from blackwood, and offered stories in exchange for fire. Ruth watched him like a coyote, studying a poisoned hare. He noticed. "You don't trust me." "No," she said, "but I don't shoot fast unless I have to." That night, Priest told her about a place called Jubilee Hollow, a basin south of the old river line where Bannock kept what he called his sanctuary. Said it was full of men who didn't believe in God, only knives. Said women didn't last long there. August looked at Ruth. She didn't flinch. They reached the hollow 4 days later. The basin wasn't a town. It was a wound in the earth, lined with shanties and dugouts, the wind carrying laughter that had no joy in it. August stayed on the ridge while Ruth descended. They decided she'd go in alone. Not because she had less to lose, but because she'd make it hurt more. She walked through Jubilee like a ghost, dirt on her face, blood on her shirt from an earlier kill she hadn't bothered to clean. The men there didn't leer, not like in other places. They looked and then looked away. Something about her said she'd already chosen who to kill. At the center of it all was a saloon built from train wood and sin. She walked through its doors just before dusk, her boots echoing louder than the piano. Cal Bannock sat at a table near the back, white beard, snake-etched revolver. One eye gone, the other still mean. He looked up as if expecting her. "Ruth," he said. She said nothing. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Been a long time." She sat, laid her pistol on the table between them. Cal didn't blink. "You want to ask why?" "No," she said, "I know why." He smiled. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to beg." He laughed, slow and rasping. "You think you're the first to come for me. Girl, I buried better men than your whole bloodline." "You never buried me," she said. And then she reached beneath the table and pulled a blade from her boot. Cal went for his gun. He wasn't fast enough. The first stab went through his hand, pinning it to the table. The second took his throat halfway. She didn't wait to see if he'd bleed out. She leaned close and whispered something into the last bit of his hearing. Then she walked out. August met her at the basin's rim. The smoke was already rising behind her. "You start the fire?" he asked. She didn't answer, but her fingers smelled of ash. They didn't go home after that, not yet. There were names still etched in August's memory, men who'd ordered deaths from behind ledgers and legal shields. And Ruth had grown into something neither of them had words for. Not a daughter. Not a weapon. Something older. Something owed. They became myth in the territories after that, the man and the girl who never blinked, the ones who rode silent and left bones in their wake. And when they finally stopped, it was not because they found peace. It was because Ruth had decided the cycle could only be broken by silence, not death. And silence had to be chosen. They settled in the high desert, where the wind stripped flesh from bone and even time moved slower. No neighbors, no roads, just dry earth, sagebrush, and the occasional screech of a hawk hunting something that didn't deserve to die that day. August built the cabin from scavenged stone, hauled lumber from a ruin 10 miles east. Ruth carved the windows narrow and tall, a shooter's view in every room. There were no curtains, nothing to hide. It wasn't peace, not exactly. But it was the furthest thing from war they'd ever had. She rarely spoke those first months, not from grief or guilt. She had long since burned those things out of herself, but from calculation. Words had become a resource, like bullets or dried meat, best used only when needed. August didn't push. He'd come to understand the girl she'd become, the woman still sharpening beneath that quiet. She still walked with a pistol at her hip, still checked the ridge at dawn, still studied maps by firelight, circling places she'd been and scratching out those that no longer mattered. They thought maybe it was over. Until the marshal came. He rode in on a mule, slow and easy, hands visible, wearing no badge but the years on his face. Name was Mace Coates, though he didn't give it at first. Just stepped down, nodded to August and said, "I need to speak with the girl." August blocked the door. "She's not a girl." Mace didn't argue. "That's why I came." Ruth stepped out behind him, gun already in her hand, not raised, just ready. I'm not here to take you in, the marshal said. Not unless you want me to. Then speak, she said. He looked at her a long time before answering. There's a judge down in Tenebris Crossing. Name's Julian Markham. He's cleaning up territory, his words, not mine. Wants the past quiet. Harrow Beck, Cal Bannock, Rig, you the others, all ghosts, all gone, but they can't stay gone unless someone makes it so. And that someone's me. No, May said, that someone is them. They want to make you disappear, final like. August shifted his weight. How many? The marshal shrugged. However many it takes. They left the next morning. It wasn't discussed, just understood. Ruth packed light. August left the door open. They didn't ride straight to Tenebris. That would have been foolish. Instead, they circled wide through old passes and dry gulches, gathering names. Not allies, they had none, just facts. Judge Markham wasn't just a man. He was a movement, a quiet purge draped in law. His men were former soldiers, bounty killers, and ex-preachers turned executioners. One town had strung up a woman just for speaking Ruth's name. In another, they found a boy with no tongue who tried to warn her. She gave him her knife. He nodded, silent, and vanished into the wind. August watched the storm rise in her eyes and didn't speak. He knew better now. Ruth would not run, not this time. Not ever again. Tenebris Crossing was built on the bones of a silver mine, old wealth repurposed for order. It wore civility like a mask, fresh paint, clean boots, barbers in every corner, but the smell underneath was rot. Lawmen walked like soldiers, rifles slung casual but ready. The judge lived above the old bank, curtains always drawn. Ruth didn't ride in through the front. She came through the waterway, a narrow stone trench carved under the main road, where rain and runoff pooled in rusted grates. She emerged behind the stable house at dusk, clothes dark with grime, her breath thin from the crawl. August followed 2 hours later, carrying nothing but a satchel and an old grudge. They met behind the mill, where the wind couldn't carry whispers. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded once. "I don't want to just kill him," she said. "I want them to know why." So they made it public. Ruth walked through the main square at noon, holstered and clean, eyes forward, every step a dare. The guards moved in slow, confused, like they weren't sure if she was myth or mistake. "I'm here for the judge," she said, loud enough for windows to open. They tried to take her alive. She didn't let them. 2 fell before the rest backed off. Then came the townsfolk, lining the boardwalks, watching in a hush thicker than prayer. She stepped over the bodies, walked to the bank steps, and called up, "Julian Markham." A curtain twitched. Ruth waited. August was already inside. He'd slipped in the back through the cellar, using old tunnels from the mine. When Markham tried to flee, he found August waiting in the hall with a scattergun pointed at his belly. "You think law keeps you safe?" August asked. Markham didn't answer. His mouth just moved, some sermon or excuse. August shot him once low, let him bleed across the rug. Then he opened the front door. Ruth stepped through. She didn't ask, didn't threaten. She just looked at the man writhing in his own words, then knelt beside him. "You made monsters to clean up your mess," she said. Markham choked something that might have been a prayer. She slit his throat slow. "Let the silence carry." They didn't stay, didn't burn it down either. Let the people decide what they wanted to remember. As they rode out, August asked her something he hadn't before. "What now?" Ruth didn't answer right away. "Then there's still too many men who think they get to name what justice looks like." August nodded. "And you?" She looked down at her hands, at the old scars, at the new ones. "I don't want to be feared," she said. "I want to be understood." That night they camped under a sky so full of stars, it looked like the world had cracked open. Neither slept much. They didn't dream anymore. They were living in the aftermath of one. They made their way north, where the trees grow thick and the rivers run black with meltwater. No roads led where they were going, just game trails and forgotten passageways between mountains that kept the world out and the ghosts in. The quiet suited them. Ruth carried no name but her own now, no disguise, no story to soften the edge. She walked like she belonged to the earth itself, like her bones remembered every inch of violence it took to survive. August walked slower these days, pain stitching itself through his hip and lower back with each frost. He never said it aloud, but Ruth saw it in his eyes every time he stood. She never offered pity, only presence. That was enough. In the third week of their wandering, they came across a settlement hidden between two ridges, no more than 6 houses, a chapel missing its steeple, and a boy watching from behind a fallen fence with a slingshot in his hand. He didn't speak when Ruth approached, just watched her with the wariness of someone who'd already lost too much. Ruth knelt. "Where's your mother?" The boy pointed toward the chapel, eyes hollow. August waited outside while Ruth entered. The woman inside was dead, weeks by the look of it, body curled near the altar, hands still clasped as if prayer could still buy mercy. Ruth buried her out back and placed a flat stone over the grave. The boy never cried. They stayed 3 days. Ruth fixed the fence. August hunted enough game to fill their packs twice over. On the 4th morning, the boy was gone. He'd left the slingshot on the steps. A goodbye or a gift, Ruth never said which. As they left, August looked back at the chapel one last time. "You could have stayed," he said, "built something there." Ruth shook her head. "There's nothing clean left in me." August didn't argue. They crossed into the bitter ranges by midsummer. The nights grew cold again. On the highest ridge, August collapsed. Ruth found him slumped by the fire, sweat soaking through his shirt though the air bit like ice. "Not now," he muttered, barely awake. "Not here." She carried him deeper into the trees, found shelter beneath a rock shelf, and kept him breathing with broth and river-washed linens. He fought through fever like a man chasing something he'd already lost. On the 3rd night, he woke long enough to speak. "You were the only good thing I did," he said. She shook her head. "You took me in to settle a debt." He smiled faintly. "No, I took you in because you were fire and I was too cold to burn." His eyes closed. He didn't wake again. She buried him beneath a cedar tree, the kind that cracks stone to survive. No marker, no cross. Just a black coat folded over a bundle of wildflowers and a single shell casing laid beside it. For 3 days, she didn't move. Then finally, she did. She walked east toward no map, no name, stopped in towns where fear still lingered, where men spoke law with blood still on their hands. She didn't offer mercy. She offered memory. And that was worse. They began to speak of her again, in whispers behind closed doors, in wanted notices nailed to rotting posts. A woman with eyes like winter and hands that knew what bone felt like. She didn't kill for gold. She didn't kill for fame. She killed because the world had broken her open, and what came out refused to be anything less than justice. Some called her a ghost. Others called her vengeance. But those who looked her in the eye and lived long enough to speak the tale, they called her Ruth. And they remembered. Because when all the bodies had cooled, all the names had been crossed out, and every fire had turned to ash, she was the one thing that remained. Not a favor. Not a weapon. Not even a survivor. She was the one thing he couldn't live without. And when he was gone, she made sure his name echoed in every silence the world tried to bury.